Something inside one of Hollywood's most respected families just collapsed, and it wasn't a scandal anyone was supposed to hear out loud. For years, a truth stayed buried behind calm voices, controlled narratives, and a powerful last name. Now, that silence is gone, and what's coming out doesn't match the story we were told. If this is true, it doesn't just change one family, it changes how power hides in plain sight. Just weeks ago, something quietly shifted behind the closed gates of Brentwood, and the reason this story matters is simple: it challenges how power, silence, and control can quietly reshape truth without ever making noise. Inside a home that once felt familiar, Tracy Reiner stood frozen, not in fear, but in recognition. This wasn't a breakdown. It was the moment years of compartmentalized memories snapped into focus all at once. The house didn't change, but the weight inside it did. Conversations she had dismissed for decades replayed with new clarity. Small moments, once explained away as harmless, suddenly aligned into something far more unsettling. And for the first time, Tracy understood that what she had been protecting wasn't peace. It was a carefully maintained silence. That realization alone reframes everything that follows, because it explains why this story didn't explode sooner and why it couldn't stay buried any longer. What makes this moment different from the rumors and speculation Hollywood is used to is who spoke and how. Tracy Reiner wasn't chasing attention. She wasn't reacting to headlines. She was someone who had stayed deliberately quiet while others controlled the narrative. When she finally spoke, witnesses say there was no accusation in her voice, no dramatic framing, just a simple admission, a secret involving Nick Reiner. One Rob Reiner had worked for years to keep contained, could no longer remain hidden. That's when the air shifted, because this wasn't a story breaking through chaos. It was breaking through calm, and calm is far more dangerous when it's been used to delay accountability. Erase the part most people didn't understand at first. Tracy wasn't revealing a single incident. She was pointing to a pattern, a series of small, disconnected moments spread across years that only made sense when viewed together. At the time, they felt isolated, easily explained, behavior attributed to stress, tension written off as personality clashes, subtle warnings softened so they wouldn't disrupt family balance. Growing up inside the Reiner household meant learning an unspoken rule: early some things could be discussed, and some absolutely could not. And whenever Nick's name surfaced in a serious context, the response never changed. Protect the family image first. Handle everything else privately. That rule shaped everyone's behavior, including Tracy's. The unsettling part is how normal it all felt. Tracy admits she questioned herself for years. Was she overreacting? Misreading things? Looking for problems that weren't there? Rob Reiner's confidence made doubt feel unreasonable. If he wasn't alarmed, why should anyone else be? That logic didn't silence her through fear. It silenced her through reassurance. Calm explanations. Promises that everything was under control. Insistence that outsiders wouldn't understand the complexity. And that's what makes this story matter within the first minutes, because it exposes how truth isn't always buried by force. Sometimes it's buried by professionalism, composure, and trust in authority. When Tracy finally spoke publicly, the reaction was immediate. Cameras appeared. Headlines multiplied. Speculation filled the gaps. But for a brief moment, the noise paused, not out of respect, but out of shock. What she shared didn't sound emotional or rehearsed. It sounded heavy, strained, like someone deciding the cost of silence had finally outweighed the cost of speaking. She admitted she had been pulled into situations she didn't fully understand at the time, moments that only revealed their meaning years later. What once seemed harmless now looked connected. What once felt accidental now appeared patterned. That realization changed how she viewed everything, and once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. This is where the narrative cracks. The polished public image surrounding the family began to feel staged. Holiday photos, carefully curated moments. All of it suddenly looked like surface-level stability, masking unresolved tension beneath. People who had felt something was off, but never named it, now struggled to ignore it. The story everyone thought they knew stopped holding together. And Tracy made one thing clear: she wasn't talking about blame. She was talking about recognition. About what happens when silence is mistaken for protection long enough that it becomes a system. And erase the rehook, because this is where the story deepens. Tracy revealed that Rob Reiner wasn't unaware or blindsided, as many assumed. According to her, there were quiet steps taken behind the scenes long before anything reached a breaking point. Not public confrontations, not dramatic interventions, but controlled arrangements designed to contain problems rather than confront them. That detail changes everything. Because once silence becomes strategy, it stops being neutral. And the moment Tracy recognized that, staying quiet stopped feeling like loyalty and started feeling like participation. Once Tracy Reiner began speaking, the story stopped being about a single secret and started becoming about structure, and that distinction is critical. Because what she revealed next wasn't chaos behind closed doors, but something far more unsettling: a system. According to Tracy, Rob Reiner didn't ignore problems surrounding Nick. He managed them, quietly, deliberately, and with an almost institutional calm. Certain conversations were never written down. Certain understandings were never formalized, yet everyone inside the family knew the boundaries. Access was managed. Freedom was negotiated. Concerns were acknowledged just enough to neutralize urgency. From the outside, the family appeared stable. Inside, Tracy says it felt like living inside a structure that had to remain perfectly balanced at all times, because one wrong move could collapse the entire image. What made this revelation hit harder was Tracy admitting that she herself had been pulled into maintaining that balance. Not directly asked to lie, not told to deny anything outright. Instead, she was subtly encouraged to soften narratives, redirect concern, reassure people that things were under control. At the time, it felt responsible, protective, even loving. Looking back, Tracy now believes it blurred a dangerous line between support and silence. Because once enough people help hold a structure in place, the structure starts to feel justified simply because it exists. And that's the moment accountability quietly disappears. This is where the story forces an uncomfortable question: what if containment doesn't protect anyone, it just delays consequences? Tracy says the turning point for her wasn't one shocking discovery. It was repetition. The same concerns resurfacing. The same calm explanations recycled. The same promise that things were being handled privately. Over time, she noticed how conversations about Nick ended before they truly began. What once felt like discretion started to feel like avoidance. Problems weren't denied. They were reframed. If something felt off, it was labeled temporary. If concern was raised, reassurance followed. And because that reassurance came from authority and confidence, challenging it felt like creating unnecessary conflict rather than addressing something real. Erased the contradiction that rehooks the story. Tracy realized that this structure didn't just manage perception, it shaped reality. By constantly smoothing over warning signs, the family stopped reacting with urgency. Situations that should have triggered hard decisions were softened, delayed, or redirected. Silence wasn't neutral. It was active. And once she saw that clearly, Tracy understood why this story mattered beyond personal grievance. Because control can look like care, and reassurance can replace action without anyone realizing the cost until it's too late. What made this even harder for Tracy to accept was recognizing how deliberate Rob's approach had been. She says this wasn't denial. It was strategy. Rob believed that calm management, professional handling, and internal control were the responsible way to prevent escalation. To him, staying composed meant staying in charge. And for years, Tracy trusted that logic because it sounded mature and protective. But slowly, she began noticing the emotional toll. Real feelings were postponed. Hard conversations delayed indefinitely. Nick's struggles were discussed in terms of logistics rather than understanding. The family reacted to symptoms instead of causes, always one step behind what was actually unfolding. The moment that shattered Tracy's trust in the system came when she realized Rob wasn't just managing outcomes. He was managing information. Who knew what? When they knew it. How serious it was allowed to feel. That realization reframed everything. It meant the truth hadn't been buried accidentally. It had been buried carefully, under the belief that time and structure would smooth everything out. And once Tracy saw that, silence stopped looking like patience. It started looking like delay. A delay that carried consequences no one wanted to name. Then came the detail that made this personal in a way Tracy couldn't ignore. For years, she had mediated conflicts, absorbed tension, protected privacy, and helped keep the family stable. Loyalty, to her, meant sacrifice, and she gave it freely. But when Rob's will eventually became known, her name wasn't there. No mention, no acknowledgement. That absence wasn't about money. It was about meaning. It forced Tracy to confront something she had avoided for a long time. Her role in the family had always been supportive, but never central. She was expected to help, to understand, to stay quiet, but not to be fully included in decisions that mattered most. That realization didn't turn her against her family. It clarified her position within it. Protecting the narrative had come at the cost of protecting herself. And once that truth became undeniable, staying silent no longer felt like loyalty. It felt like erasing her own reality to preserve someone else's control. That's when Tracy stopped asking how to keep the story intact and started asking who that story was really protecting. And this is where the tension tightens again. Because Tracy made one thing clear: the will wasn't the breaking point. It was confirmation. Proof that loyalty had never guaranteed inclusion. That her value had been situational, not foundational. And once she understood that, continuing to carry the silence became impossible.
You do have the craft of being a filmmaker, so you do. There are certain grammatic, there's certain film grammar that you're going to use to tell a story. But I could never get away from the fact that it's personal because we're doing it together.
By the time Tracy Reiner reached this point, the story had already shifted from emotion to evidence. And that's where it became impossible to dismiss as family conflict or hindsight regret. Tracy revealed that what finally locked everything into place for her wasn't a single conversation or argument, but records. Not public documents meant to be scrutinized in court, but personal notes, timelines, and private communications Rob Reiner kept over the years. On their own, they didn't look alarming. But when Tracy saw them together, spread across time, they told a story that no public narrative had ever acknowledged. Dates repeated. The same concerns resurfaced. The same language appeared again and again: temporary, managed, under review. What stood out wasn't panic. It was confidence. Confidence that time, structure, and discretion would eventually smooth everything out. This is where Tracy says the illusion finally collapsed. Because those records made it clear Rob knew more, earlier, than most people assume. Not in a way that suggested chaos or loss of control, but in a way that showed awareness paired with belief. Belief that calm handling would prevent escalation. Tracy now believes that confidence delayed the very conversations that might have changed outcomes. And what shook her most wasn't just what those records said, it was where she appeared in them. Small references, side notes, mentions of her calming influence, her ability to keep things steady. It became clear her role in the family wasn't accidental. It was functional. She wasn't just a bystander. She was part of the mechanism that helped the system hold together. Erase the rehook that deepens the tension. Tracy says those records didn't document confusion. They documented choice. Choice after choice to delay rather than confront. To manage rather than disrupt. And once she saw that pattern stretched across years, it became impossible to argue that everything spiraled out of nowhere. The family didn't lack awareness. They lacked urgency. There was always the belief that the next adjustment would work. That stability could be engineered if everyone stayed calm enough. Tracy now believes that assumption became the most dangerous one of all. What makes this story unsettling is how familiar it feels. Tracy admits none of those decisions looked irresponsible in isolation. Each one sounded reasonable, professional, mature, but stacked together, they created momentum, a slow accumulation of pressure that no one wanted to acknowledge until consequences arrived on their own terms. That's why Tracy insists her truth reframes responsibility. It challenges the idea that good intentions automatically produce good outcomes. Once that frame shifts, the entire narrative surrounding Nick and the silence around him has to be reconsidered from the ground up. Then Tracy revealed a moment she can't stop replaying. A quiet warning she raised years ago: careful, measured, deliberately non-confrontational. Instead of triggering action, it was met with calm reassurance that everything was already being handled. Professionals were involved. Safeguards were in place. Plans were moving forward. Tracy says she wanted to believe that more than anything, because believing it meant she didn't have to push harder or risk becoming disruptive. In hindsight, she believes that calm became a substitute for accountability. The warning wasn't rejected. It was absorbed and neutralized. And that, she says, was the moment concern turned passive. Hey race, where fear enters the story. Tracy admits she's deeply unsettled by the possibility that Nick could eventually walk free, not because of new evidence she's seen, but because of access, influence, connections. She's careful not to accuse anyone of wrongdoing, but she's watched how power quietly moves when situations become complicated. Nick isn't isolated. He's surrounded by people who understand systems, timing, and pressure points. Tracy has seen influence soften consequences before. She's seen calm assurances replace hard questions. And now, watching similar patterns emerge around legal processes has left her uneasy. This time, she says, it feels like the same dynamics playing out in a courtroom instead of a living room. That fear is what pushed her further into the light. Because if outcomes can be shaped, then truth has to be louder than access. Silence now wouldn't just be personal. It would be dangerous. And once she accepted that, the warnings she received after speaking didn't surprise her. Relationships cooled. Calls stopped. She was quietly advised to be careful. Legal language replaced family language. Suggestions to let the process work sounded eerily similar to the reassurances she'd heard for years. Instead of pulling back, Tracy says that pressure clarified everything. She had already paid the price of silence emotionally and personally. Losing more no longer scared her the way living with regret did. What's striking is how Tracy frames this moment. She doesn't describe bravery or defiance. She describes being finished. Finished with protecting systems that never protected people. Finished with absorbing tension so others could stay comfortable. Once she reached that point, fear lost its leverage. Speaking honestly stopped feeling risky and started feeling necessary. Because when you understand how narratives are shaped and repeated, staying quiet stops being restraint, it becomes consent.
Well, yeah, I mean, he says, well, I know Carl Reiner, he says to me. I said, really? I said, well, he's my dad. And he said,
by the time Tracy Reiner fully stepped into the public eye, she understood something that most people never confront until it's too late. Silence doesn't just hide truth, it reshapes it. What disturbed her most wasn't backlash or distance, it was recognition. Recognition of how easily the same calm explanations she had lived under for years were now being repeated by people far outside the family. The same language, the same logic, the same insistence that everything was being handled responsibly. Hearing those phrases echoed back to her from strangers confirmed something deeply unsettling. The narrative had traveled. It had taken on a life of its own, quietly normalized, rarely questioned, and dangerously effective. This was the moment Tracy says she stopped doubting her own memory. For years, she wondered if she had misunderstood situations or exaggerated patterns. But when the same reassurances resurfaced in legal discussions and public commentary around Nick, she realized this wasn't confusion. It was systemic. The story hadn't just been managed inside the family. It had been exported, passed along, repeated until it sounded factual simply because it was familiar. And that realization changed the stakes entirely. Speaking up was no longer about the past. It was about interrupting a cycle that was still shaping outcomes in real time. What makes this moment especially heavy is how calm Tracy remains when she explains it. There's no anger in her voice, no dramatic framing, just clarity. She says power doesn't always silence people directly. Sometimes it makes speaking feel inconvenient, exhausting, or socially costly. Over time, fewer people are willing to keep asking uncomfortable questions, not because they're wrong, but because they're tired. That fatigue, Tracy believes, is what allows incomplete truths to settle into permanence. She also describes how quickly comfort returns once attention shifts. Early urgency fades. Questions become less pointed. Familiar explanations resurface. That's how accountability slowly dissolves, not through denial, but through repetition. Tracy worries that if people stop connecting the dots, this story will be reduced to isolated moments instead of recognized as a pattern years in the making. And patterns, she says, are what actually matter. What changed most for Tracy is how she now defines responsibility. It's no longer loyalty to a name or a legacy. It's loyalty to reality, even when that reality disrupts people who are used to control. She knows speaking has isolated her. Relationships have cooled. Trust has fractured. But she describes that isolation as cleaner than the quiet guilt she carried before. Silence may have kept things calm, but it never kept them honest. As the story continues to evolve, Tracy is careful not to frame this as an ending. She believes stories like this don't end, they pause, reshape, and resurface when people stop paying attention. What matters now isn't outrage, but curiosity. Who benefits when explanations stay smooth? Which questions quietly disappear? And what happens when calm is mistaken for progress? For Tracy, crossing back into silence is no longer an option. Once you see how narratives are built and protected, pretending not to notice becomes its own form of participation. And that's the line she refuses to cross again. What makes this story linger isn't a single revelation or accusation. It's the uncomfortable realization that truth doesn't always disappear when it's buried. Sometimes it waits. Tracy Reiner's decision to speak didn't resolve anything neatly. It disrupted something far more powerful, a system that relied on calm voices, delayed action, and managed narratives to function without scrutiny. And once that system is exposed, even partially, it can't return to its original shape. This story matters because it forces a harder question than who knew what and when. It asks how often good intentions become excuses for inaction, how often reassurance replaces urgency, and how often silence is mistaken for wisdom when it's really just delay. Tracy isn't asking to be believed by everyone. She's asking people not to stop asking questions once the noise fades. Because the most important moments are never the loud ones. They're the quiet shifts that follow. What details stop being discussed? Which explanations become default? And who benefits when discomfort slowly turns into acceptance? Some stories don't end when they're told. They end when people stop paying attention. Subscribe for more deep investigative breakdowns like this.